It's loading. We're like halfway there. And there we are. Put the thing in the chat. Can you make one of your tweets as the story, or do you have to like screenshot it? Oh Lord. That's there it is. Sharon Fleet. There we go. Use my first fleet.
Ah, beautiful.
All right, we're going to go 3, 2, 1. This is the Rich Report, bringing you the richest content across entertainment. We're starting something new here. We're going to be live streaming the podcast now. So in case you can't hear it later on during the day and actually have time during your morning to listen to it now, here you go. Sean and I live. We're not going to have Johnny Crane today, a little bit busy with work. A lot of us are busy with work right now, but Sean's here regardless. Sean, how are you doing today?
Doing fantastic. Been a interesting few weeks in the sports world. Entertainment is being very interesting right now with Loki making its premiere today as well. So a lot going on. Excited to talk about it.
But first off, we got to get right into it because, again, Paul George, Pandemic P, has returned once again for a second straight year with the Los Angeles Clippers. Now, it's one thing. Okay, one struggling year. You know, we had a crazy 2020 season. We had to go all the way to the Orlando bubble. A lot of players talking about, you know, having some mental health concerns and issues in the bubble, you know, being isolated from family and friends and all that. And Paul George admittedly said he struggled because of that. And I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. But here we come. The 2021 playoffs. Clippers have even higher expectations. You have Paul George and Kawhi Leonard. You have to get the job done and at least, at the bare minimum, reach the conference finals. You failed tremendously last year against the Denver Nuggets, blowing a 3-1 series lead in the second round. Here you are, an almost nightmare scenario occurred in the first round, losing to the Dallas Mavericks, but they survived that in 7 games. A great close of the series from Kawhi Leonard. And here we are with game 1 against the Jazz. Now, I can say it's sort of a positive when the Stars play like absolute garbage and only lose by a single possession. But still, the final 5 minutes from the Clippers, I could say starting from halfway through the third quarter, was a complete train wreck. Kawhi Leonard and Paul George just seem like they're not the guys. They don't have that killer instinct that you would expect from a robot like Kawhi, who, you know, was scoring 46 and, you know, dropping 40-point games against Dallas. And, you know, going back to his Spurs and Raptors days, the guy was a complete killer. Now he's coming on the Clippers and he's deferring the final shot of the game to Marcus Morris, who was 1 for 8 from the 3 before he shot up the final one that was inevitably blocked by Rudy Gobert. Like, is this just a Clipper culture thing? Like, I don't get how a guy who's certifiably a Hall of Famer after all of his feats with Toronto for a single year comes to the Clippers, and that guy that we all feared is deferring to Marcus Morris. Kawhi and Paul George on that final possession were passing the ball back and forth to each other because neither wanted to take the final shot. Paul George knew he definitely didn't want to take the shot, and Kawhi deferred to Marcus Morris. So, Sean, look, there's positives in losing by a single possession when your stars play bad. But what does it say when we got Kawhi and Paul George, the 2 stars of this team, deferring to an inferior shooter, and also in that whole fourth quarter, pretty much Tyronn Lue kept Luke Kennard, a non-defender, pinned him on Donovan Mitchell, and Donovan Mitchell went off in that fourth quarter. I mean, what can you say about this team that already hasn't been said?
I think we need to relax a little bit here. Didn't the LA Clippers just a few days ago come back from a 3-2 series deficit against the Dallas Mavericks?
I mean, they were down 2-0 and 3-2. So, I mean, again, it's not the end of the world, but still, I mean, watching the fourth quarter was pretty awful from the Clippers last night.
Okay, it wasn't great. I don't disagree with anything you're saying, but I think you need to relax here a little bit. They came back from a 2-0 deficit against the Mavericks and a 3-2 deficit. They clearly have some sort of killer instinct if they were able to overcome that deficit. They didn't just fold under pressure like they did last season against the Denver Nuggets. They actually came out with a lot of fight in games 6 and 7, and they were able to hold off the hot shooting Dallas Mavericks. Remember, the Mavericks have one of the best three-point shooting teams in the entire NBA. We thought, oh man, there's no way the Clippers can keep up with them in both games 6 and 7, right? Well, guess what they did? This is game one. Sometimes in a game one, you have a lesser sense of urgency. You got to remember the Clippers 2 days before this game one, they just played a game 7. Do you really think that the Clippers are going to be playing with their hair on fire 2 days after they played a game 7? No, not saying that they didn't care, but of course they're not going to have as much of a killer instinct. It's only game 1 of a series against the Jazz and a series where they may possibly will win. The fact that the Clippers stars played that poorly and they still only lost by 3 points and Donovan Mitchell had to go off to win, that to me shows that the Clippers are the better team in this series. And I think that the Clippers are going to be just fine. If it takes a superhuman performance from Donovan Mitchell to go off and it takes poor performances, if I'm a Jazz fan, I'm really worried right now.
I mean,
so
you also got to look at it as there was no Mike Conley either. And I think Charles Barkley on Inside the NBA made a good point saying Donovan Mitchell's the guy that likes to go to the rim. He likes to shoot the ball a lot. But Mike Conley, when he's on the court, he can spread the ball, give it to a Joe Ingles or feed it down low to Gobert or feed it to Bogdan for Bogdanovich for a wide open shot. And, that creates more scoring for Utah. And they were one of the best 3-point shooting teams in the league. Not in the first quarter last night. They were pretty bad. I think they missed 14 of the first 17 or something like that before Jordan Clarkson finally got going. But do you think Mike Conley's absence last night was the real factor for Utah's struggles?
I think it's part of it. I do think that Utah definitely had some nerves a bit here. They also were a little bit rusty. You could also tell that they weren't shooting as well because they were a little bit rusty. They did finish off the Memphis Grizzlies in a tough 5-game series. Now, I know it was only in 5 games, but that series was closer than it indicated. The Grizzlies did their best to compete with the Utah Jazz. And I think that with Mike Conley's absence, that was one less weapon that the Utah Jazz had out there. So I think that combined with rust, it was a sloppy game. I think that the Clippers are the better team in this series and are still going to win because I think that as the series goes along, Paul George and Kawhi Leonard are going to have more of that killer instinct. But obviously, you got to look at both sides of the equation. And with Mike Conley's absence and with Utah's rust, Utah was hampered as well. It's going to be a close series. I said the Clippers were going to win before the series started, and I'm still sticking with it. I just think that it was a bad game for both teams. I don't think there's too much to take away from my side because both played poorly, but I think both are going to be much better as the series go along.
Now, we can look at this playoffs and go, okay, well, the Brooklyn Nets have Kyrie, they have Harden, they have Kevin Durant, and go, yeah, they're probably going to win the finals if they don't have an epic collapse. But can we just at least give an appreciation that, the last team to make the finals of the teams in the final 8 were the Nets back in 2003 when they lost to the Spurs. The last team to win the finals of all the teams left, Sean, can you say who it was? It was
Dallas. No, not Dallas.
It was the Philadelphia 76ers in 1983. We're talking 38 years that some drought will be broken. At least that's low. That's the lowest it can come down to. So, yeah, 38 years was the most recent champion of the final 8 teams in the playoffs. So look, there's that. At least we can say there will be a brand new champion, not your average run of the mill Lakers or Warriors or anything like that, or Miami Heat. So at least we have that. But on the Brooklyn side, we kind of have some ridiculous results in a second round of the playoff series. Brooklyn Nets absolutely running through the Milwaukee Bucks right now. And my biggest concern is not just that we're overloading 3-star players onto one franchise when we have 30 in this league, but it's the fact that we can talk about Damian Lillard for Portland or Giannis for Milwaukee, is that these small market franchises are really not going to go anywhere. You know, this is about the peak they can hit. Milwaukee's been a 1 seed a couple times and they've fallen short. You know, Eric Bledsoe obviously wasn't the guy to get the job done. They're bringing Jrue Holiday, and honestly, they look even worse against a star-studded team. Now, Giannis is a superstar in his own right, but he just doesn't have the guys around him. To me, and I'll bring this up with the MLS every time I see a brand new team being talked about. Expansion, to me, is never the answer unless you just have too much talent. You have to have too much talent in your pool. The supply has to be greater than the demand for you to expand your clubs. To me, when I look at the MLS, I don't see a giant demand. I don't see the demand being greater than the supply. I don't see the supply being greater than the demand. I just don't think there's enough talent in the MLS to say, yes, we need to get up to 30 teams. In the NBA, there's maybe 10 teams every year that you can say they can enter your say, yes, they can at least make a run towards the conference semis. But by the time you get to the conference finals, you can pretty much predict the Final Four every single year. And in 8 of the last 9 years, you could have predicted who the champion was, and the outlier being the Toronto Raptors, because Golden State had to have season-ending injuries for Toronto to win in 6 games. And even when they were injured, they were still in tight battles with the Warriors. So it sucks to say it, but what do we do with these small markets? Because what does the league do? Because we can't just have the same year with the Lakers, the Warriors, the Clippers, the Nets, the Knicks are going to be rising back up. The Suns, even though they haven't been a great franchise. Now, granted, that's to poor, terrible management, but they're in a large market as well. You also talk about Philadelphia. Atlanta's on the rise as well. Again, those are all teams in large markets. But what are we going to do when it's the Jazz? What if they don't win the finals this year? What if the Bucks never get going? There's no incentive for these superstars to go to these smaller markets. And Damian Lillard and Giannis are already incentivized to leave because Portland's been running the same thing. It's the same cycle year in and year out, and Milwaukee always underachieves. So expansion was probably never the answer. A league at best should be 15 to 20 teams if you just don't have that big of a talent pool. The NHL has a large talent pool. The MLB has a large talent pool, but that's because we can develop players in these minor league systems. NHL's got a lot of them. MLB has a lot of them. The NBA has one G League, and there's not a lot of teams in that G League. So where do we go? The MLS does not have really that much of a development program. There's no relegation demotion system that we have, and they probably need it at this point because I'm sorry, Sean, there's just not that many relevant clubs in the MLS. So again, you can, I'm not disagreeing with anything you say. Anything you say, it's all fair game, but I'm just saying my perspective, and what I'm seeing is a trend that the NBA does not care about small market franchises.
Okay. Listen. I have a lot of issues with the NBA. Okay. The NBA is, of the 4 major sports, the more I go along, the more I realize it is the most flawed league when it comes to entertainment value. The playoff system is the worst of the 4. And you also see a lot of top heaviness. That's the way it is. But cutting down the teams, I'm sorry, that's an absurd solution.
Well, I'm not saying cutting down the teams, but I said expansion is never the answer, in my opinion. Unless you're just getting started, like the NWSL is now getting a San Diego and LA franchise, but it only brings the league to 12 clubs. And maybe that line stops somewhere between 15 and 20, unless there's just that many great women soccer players in the United States or globally. And maybe that's when you get the incentivized to grow. But when it's 30 teams, 31, 32 here, the Premier League, the top league in the entire world, is only at 20. That should tell you something, shouldn't it?
I do think that is fair. Now, when comparing other leagues, I definitely think that the number of teams in the pool is equivalent to the talent level. I do agree that the NBA's talent pool is not as big as the other four major sports. I do agree with that. Now, I do think the 30 teams is fine, but I do admit that there are some really bad teams. Look how bad the Houston Rockets were this season. But in every sport, you have a bunch of bad teams. And I think that it creates a similar challenge with baseball. Like, I'm sorry, you can't sit there and tell me that the NBA has too many teams and you're going to tell me that the MLB doesn't have the same problem. I'm sorry, they both do. Because
a franchise like the Washington Nationals equivalent in the NBA, ever going to be a title contender? Are the Tampa Bay Rays equivalent in the NBA ever going to make the finals?
Absolutely. Because here's the thing. The Milwaukee Bucks are one of the smallest markets in the NBA. Haven't they been at the top of the Eastern Conference the last few years? I know they haven't gotten the job done in the playoffs.
They've made one conference finals, and this is a team with arguably the biggest star in the league, and they haven't really gone far. I mean, the Rockets made what? I think they made 2 in a row. Did they not, with Chris Paul and Harden? I mean, granted, they ran into the Golden State Warriors. Any other year, the Rockets probably get to the finals. When you're playing KD, Steph Curry, Draymond Green, and Klay Thompson all together, there's nothing much you can do about that.
Yeah, they lost in the conference finals and then the second round. But the Milwaukee Bucks are top contenders. Utah Jazz is one of the smallest markets. They're the top seed in the Western Conference. I get that they haven't been to the finals specifically, but they're still contenders. Okay, let's look at Major League Baseball. When was the last time the Pittsburgh Pirates did anything? 1992. Tampa Bay Rays have to scratch and claw to get the way the World Series. The Kansas City Royals have had 3 good seasons in the last 35 years. Okay.
They won a World Series and they got the 2 in a row. Does that not count for anything?
It does. But the point that I'm making here is that you can't tell me that NBA small market teams don't have the chance. The Denver Nuggets, like, I live in Colorado. Okay. It's not the biggest of markets. Okay. And I can tell, and wait a minute, didn't their center win the MVP? Oh, wait a second. You got to shout that out. Nikola Jokic, while
ESPN ran a Taco Bell commercial for I think it was the quesarito.
Yeah,
that was trending on Twitter yesterday. Jokic, they didn't even do Jokic's announcement live. And now look, a couple years later, he's the MVP of the league. So pretty much a big in your face, the NBA. Now, granted, I think there are exceptions to the rule. Denver could be that team, especially if Jamal Murray gets healthy and they can keep that core big 3 of Murray, MPJ, and Jokic. That's a team that can win the finals. Can we say without a doubt Utah could win a series against the Brooklyn Nets? 100% without a doubt. Can you say the Utah Jazz right now, the way they're constructed, can go beat the Brooklyn Nets, a team that's running over Giannis by 40 a night now and just running away with that series?
I'm not going to say with 100% certainty the Jazz would win, but I think they would have a chance. The reason I say that is because, okay, so we talked about earlier how the Utah Jazz struggle to shoot, but if Mike Conley's back and the Utah Jazz can shake off their shooting rust, they can compete with the Nets, because I would say that the Jazz have more depth than the Nets do. Yeah, the Nets, the Nets have so much firepower, but they're more top heavy. The Jazz have a lot of depth and the Jazz have a lot of shooters. The Jazz are a much better team than Milwaukee Bucks, and Milwaukee Bucks are not a great shooting team. Okay. But the thing, let me just sum up what I'm trying to say here. The MLB and the NBA both have a big market issue. Both of them do. Because there's a lot of, I'd say there are more bad teams in Major League Baseball than the NBA. I'm sorry, the Pittsburgh Pirates have a war with first base. Okay, there's not an NBA team that's that bad. Okay, like literally go look at the two instances with the Pittsburgh Pirates. Okay,
Houston Rockets are pretty garbage this year. The Pistons, when was the last time the Pistons have been of quality?
They did make the playoffs 2 They did make the playoffs 2 years ago.
We're talking about the Eastern Conference.
But the Pittsburgh Pirates have made 3 playoff appearances in the last 30 years.
This is true.
Okay, so trust me. So what you're saying makes sense, but that also plays in because here's the thing: this is not an issue in the NFL and the NHL. Why? Because the talent pool is insane. Because in the NHL, yes, we do have the Buffalo Sabres, but the Buffalo Sabres did have Taylor Hall, who was an MVP a couple years ago. Also in the NHL, if you have a great goaltender, that can mask a lot of your flaws. And the NFL has the most insane talent pool of any league in the entire world, besides possibly the English Premier League. Because the Premier League definitely is great from top to bottom, which is why even the 17th place club can compete with a club like Manchester City. Burnley's a solid club. They can knock off some of the top 6. The NFL has great players on every single team. The Jacksonville Jaguars just got Trevor Lawrence, and DJ Chark is a really good number 1 wide receiver. So in the NFL and NHL, my mic just fell down. In the NFL and NHL, you don't have the small market issues. Every team can compete, and that's why that the NHL and the NFL and the Stanley Cup playoffs are 2 of the most exciting postseason systems there is. But the NFL and NBA and MLB, small markets are a bigger issue, but there's not much you can do with it because of the way those sports are set up. The talent pool isn't as deep as it is in NFL and NHL. So I just think that with the NBA and MLB, they do have a similar issue, but I still think that the amount of teams are good. It's just that can those organizations find a way to build up the talent? It just really comes down to the organization at the end of the day.
Let's skip away from the NBA and go to the Stanley Cup playoffs. And Sean Clark, your beloved Colorado Avalanche, are falling apart. The Stanley Cup favorites coming in to the season. They had the entire lineup to get the job done, up and destroying the Vegas Golden Knights 2-0, got those home games in, and then all of a sudden they came to Vegas and it fell apart. The Avs are now down 3-2 and will have to go back to Vegas where they were dominated by the Golden Knights. Sean, it's not looking good. Am I going to create a therapy session in our little group chat for tomorrow?
I was very terrified of this series going into it. I have been singing Vegas's praises since they entered the league. Vegas's puck movement is better than even the prime Chicago Blackhawks. And trust me, I watched a lot of the prime Chicago Blacks in the mid-2010s. I have almost never seen a team that can move the puck as well as Vegas does. It is truly phenomenal to see. And Vegas's goaltending duo is top-notch. Now, Robin Lehner hasn't been tremendous this postseason, but Marc-Andre Fleury has. Marc-Andre Fleury has to go down as one of the top 10 best goaltenders of all time. Okay, what he has done throughout his career is nothing short of sensational. He won 3 Stanley Cups with the Pittsburgh Penguins. And he led Vegas to the Stanley Cup final in their first year of existence. Vegas has been an elite hockey team since they have entered the league. They get better almost every single year. Last year, Vegas was in the conference finals. They're even better this year, I think. Here's the thing: they don't have a true superstar, but their depth is terrifying. On a lot of teams, Alex Tuch would be a third liner, but yet Vegas can make him a superstar. How do they do this? I have no idea. Vegas's depth is scary. Their puck movement is scary. Their goaltending is scary. Everything about Vegas is terrifying, except that they don't have a true go-to superstar. But when Vegas plays their physical brand of hockey, they can frustrate teams. Vegas was humiliated by the Dallas Stars in 5 games in the conference finals last year. What did Vegas decide to do? They decided to get more physical. Now, Ryan Reeves is not exactly a great human being on the ice. I'm saying on the ice, but they've been more physical elsewhere. So they've learned from what happened last year. They've been more physical. They survived the pesky and frustrating Minnesota Wild. And like, oh, we're playing a Colorado team that isn't as physical as Minnesota was. And you're telling me that all we have to do is continue to move the puck well and make sure that they don't fly all over us. Okay, we can do that. And because of this, they are in control, and I don't see them losing game 6. The problem with Colorado is that they're just a little bit too finessed. This is what happened with the Dallas Stars last year. You got to have the balance of puck movement and being physical, and Vegas does that as well as any team in the NHL.
So what you're saying is for Colorado to even have a shot to win tomorrow or in a potential game 7 is that they need to be physical. You know, it's not the first line dominating Colorado. It's not Pacioretty. It's not Mark Stone, although Mark Stone did get the OT winner last night. But it's that second line, Jonathan Marchessault, William Karlsson, Riley Smith. That, you know, you would think your line one's your best line, but similar to the LA Kings of 2014, their second line was that 70s line with Jeff Carter, Tanner Pearson, and Tyler Toffoli. This looks to be that second coming, even though it's with a team that I don't enjoy watching at all. Marchessault, Karlsson, and Riley Smith are really doing something special with that line. I believe they're probably the top scoring line on this team, and they're definitely doing it against Colorado. So what adjustments do the Avs need to make in order to keep that second line from really dominating and winning this series for Vegas?
They need to be more physical. They need to emphasize forechecking a lot more. They just need to get up in Vegas's face. And Colorado's is not a team to do that. But when your backs are against the wall, what are you going to do? This is your season. Are you about to get eliminated in the second round of the playoffs for the 3rd year in a row? Because that's exactly what you're facing right now. Let's look at their Pepsi Center equivalent. No, I'm not saying Ball Arena, Pepsi Center. Okay, like that is my native Colorado protest here. Okay.
Speaking of that Ball sponsorship, I finally got a commercial for it that I sent you guys this morning. I'm just like, that's what replaced the great Pepsi Center name. That's what we're calling this arena now, Ball Arena. I believe it was some like water filter thing. I don't know what it is. It's very small. It's the first time I've ever seen a commercial for that Ball product. I'm just like, no. How much money do they have? I've only seen one commercial. It's the first commercial I've seen with that product. And somehow they had the money and the investors to get the entire arena name for one of the great arenas in sports in the Pepsi Center. I don't know how it happened.
Yeah, trust me. As someone who adores the Pepsi Center, it just upsets me. But anyways, looking at the Avalanche need to look at their Pepsi Center counterparts in the Denver Nuggets. Well, last year, the Denver Nuggets faced 2 3-1 deficits. You know how they overcame both of them? They did something uncharacteristic. Trust me, the Denver Nuggets are not an elite shooting team by any stretch of the imagination. They never have been. Okay, their trademark has always been either Carmelo Anthony going inside and they're flashy driving the paint, or they have a circle offense with Nikola Jokic. But the reason the Nuggets were able to overcome 3-1 deficit is because they just went off from beyond the arc. They just went absolutely off. They just were nailing 3 after 3, which is uncharacteristic of Denver. The Avalanche need to do something uncharacteristic of what they do. The Avalanche need to be physical. They need to forecheck. They need to get in Vegas's face. That's the only way you're going to be able to counteract Vegas, because Vegas clearly has figured you out. You got to do something uncharacteristic to get back at Vegas. So that's the adjustment that they need to make.
Now it seems to be the playoffs of veteran goalies getting the job done. We got Marc-Andre Fleury getting the job done with Vegas. And now it seems to be Carey Price has found his peak form once again. Yes, the Montreal Canadiens, a franchise that really has been absent since they last won the Cup in 1993. The most decorated franchise in the NHL, the Canadiens, are now off to the Stanley Cup semifinals, and they won the Canadian division. We knew the Canadian division was going to be the meme division of the season because of everybody's shortcomings. We got it with the Toronto Maple Leafs blowing a 3-1 series lead, the most cursed playoff franchise in sports. Now, the Canadians, after Winnipeg swept Edmonton, they get swept by the Canadians. Nobody expected Montreal to get this far. Sean, you had the Jets winning in 5, and the Canadians ended up sweeping the Jets. Just Carey Price, if Montreal gets to the Cup Finals, you can make an argument that even if they lose and Carey Price still plays good enough in that series, that you could have a losing team player end up winning Conn Smythe. Because that's just how good Carey Price has been this postseason. Do you agree?
Absolutely. Now, I did pick the Winnipeg Jets to win in 5. I had a good reason for it, though. Connor Hellebuyck played really well against Edmonton when they swept them, so they had the goaltending. The Jets have a lot of firepower in Mike Scheifele, who was suspended after game 1, and that was it. Blake Wheeler, Kyle Connor. The Winnipeg Jets were loaded everywhere you looked. Okay. They were loaded, and they had the goaltender to back it up. On paper, it looked like the Jets were by far the superior team. It's just that Carey Price just went off. And I have seen this time and time again in the NHL. When a goaltender goes off, it just changes the whole ball game in general. In 2017, Jake Allen for the St. Louis Blues went off against the second-seeded Minnesota Wild. St. Louis Blues won that series. Thatcher Demko for the Vancouver Canucks last year made it to Game 7 against a far superior Vegas Golden Knights team. Okay, when you have that goaltender that can just take you over the hump, or Pekka Rinne, did you really think the Nashville Predators were the best team in the Western Conference 2017? No! But they still made it all the way to the Stanley Cup Finals. Why? Because Pekka Rinne played God mode. Okay, and then your name tree jinxed them with Pekka Rinne is too good right now. But here's the thing. Sometimes having that goaltender can just take you over the hump. Having a goaltender can just carry you all the way. Jonathan Quick did that with the Kings. You should know this. Jonathan Quick went God mode so many times.
You're acting like the Kings couldn't score, which was not the case in either year they ran for the Cup.
They could score, but Jonathan Quick definitely saved their butts at times. Okay, you can't tell me that he didn't at times.
Yeah, saved their butts with those 4 games. They were down 2-0 in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
They were down 2-0 in Chicago every time in that 2014 series. All 4 games in Chicago, they trailed 2-0.
But Carey Price is doing that with Montreal this season. He has basically gone into Super Saiyan mode and has allowed Montreal to not have as much pressure. Tyler Toffoli, oh yes, Tyler Toffoli, along with a bunch of other cast-offs and rookies and stuff like that. Montreal has really just been a scrappy team. Carey Price has been fantastic, and Montreal has scored just enough to advance. And if Montreal can somehow get past Vegas, most likely, which I don't see how that's possible, but if they do, then yeah, Carey Price should be a Hall of Famer the second he retires and win the Conn Smythe Trophy, because that would be an insane feat. There's no way Montreal should be able to beat Vegas, but if they're able to do so, then Carey Price should be immortalized, because that is just insane.
Building that statue outside the Bell Center.
Oh yeah, build that statue.
I'm
absolutely.
still waiting on Quicks when it goes up in front of Staples Center, because that man deserves it for that 3-year run between 2012 and 2014.
This is true.
All right, Sean, let me put you in this scenario. We're in extra time in the 120th minute of a certain soccer match that occurred over the weekend. We got Andres Guardado going up for a penalty. US is up 3-2. All hope is pretty much lost, and the USA will somehow find a way to blow it and penalty kicked. It's up to our goalkeeper, Ethan Horvath, to make a stop after replacing Zach Steffen in the second half. We expect the goal to go in, because that's just what happens. USA can never beat Mexico, but we were up 3-2 after Christian Pulisic, Wonder Boy, who had just won the Champions League week prior, puts US above Mexico 3-2. But Mexico looks like they're going to tie it, and Ethan Horvath of all players for this club for this squad to get the job done, makes the save, and the U.S. finally goes on to beat Mexico for some hardware and win the CONCACAF Nations League. Sean, I don't know if you watched it live or not, but what was your reaction to Ethan Horvath making the save? Because you would think USA-Mexico rivalry, Mexico owns us. When do we not lose 1-0 or 2-0 to this country? You know, it seems every year it's the same story, but not this year. US beating Mexico. You can say, well, Nations League doesn't matter at all, or, you know, whatever, but it's the USA beating Mexico that matters. And both teams had their A squads going. So this was huge for the US. But Sean, first off, your reaction to the penalty for Mexico and then Horvath making the stop heard around the world.
The last 15 minutes of that match were some of the most insane, gut-wrenching, and euphoric moments ever. First of all, I was so happy when Christian Pulisic nailed that penalty. That was a perfectly placed penalty. Ochoa had no chance to save that. No chance. And when Horvath made that save, it was relief and it was excitement. Ethan Horvath is a goaltender for the best Belgian club, Club Bruges. So that's where Horvath plays. And for him to make the save after Zach, now you would think that Zach Steffen could make a save like that. But Zach Steffen got injured. So Ethan Horvath has stepped up. And for Ethan Horvath, the backup goaltender, to make a save like that, that's just that I lost my mind. And it's just one of those iconic moments that will go down in U.S. soccer history forever. The U.S. men's national team has been under fire the last few years from both of us in particular. We wrote, obviously, everyone and their mother in the U.S. roasted them for losing to Trinidad and Tobago. You and I in 2019 roasted them on the radio show for losing to Canada. We also roasted them for losing to Honduras. So we've been roasting this team so hard the last 4 years, but now we finally have something to celebrate, and it feels so good. Horvath made a great save. Gio Reyna looks like a future superstar for the U.S. men's national team. He scored in the 82nd minute. U.S. has a bright future, and I cannot wait to see what happens next. And as long as U.S. doesn't screw up the World Cup qualifiers, we should see them in Qatar. And I wrote an article for the Lumberjack talking about if Christian Pulisic can really take that superstar mantle, that he can grow U.S.'s popularity for soccer by the time the World Cup comes to the North America in 2026. And he's starting to do that. The photo of him celebrating with his shirt off in front of the Mexico crowd, that's iconic. That is iconic. And I think with that, you're going to start to see soccer popularity start to creep up a little bit more, hopefully. But this was a big win for the U.S. men's national team, and it was a joy to see.
Now, was it a plus that the last one of the remaining players from the 2014 run, John Brooks, is like the old guy on the team, even though he's only 28 years old? This is a very young squad, so maybe they'll show some strides in 2022. Potential quarterfinal run, maybe, but that's a little, hoping. But this club, I should stop saying club. This squad, this nation's squad, could hit their peak when we host the World Cup in 2026. Am too far-fetched to say that? Or 2026 should be we need to be at least, anything less than a quarterfinal to semifinal run is failure.
Here's the thing. The U.S. could be at their best in 2026. Gio Reyna is still very young, and Gio Reyna is a starter for Borussia Dortmund. Okay, that's pretty impressive. Pulisic is going to get better. Obviously, you got Zach Steffen, Serginho Dest, who's already starting for FC Barcelona. By the way, who has more international trophies than Lionel Messi? Just got to point that out. But there's so much young talent on the U.S. men's national team. Then, in 4 years they could be amazing. Here's the problem with having those high expectations, though. You do know that England has a lot of superstars such as Phil Foden, Mason Greenwood, Reece James, countless others. France is a factory. Germany's under 21 squad looks ridiculous. Oh yeah, also England, Jadon Sancho as well. Can't forget about him. Because England may win the 2026 World Cup. I'm not even joking. And I am not ready I am not prepared for that emotionally. Brazil has a bunch of young talent. Argentina is about to be taken over by Lautaro Martinez. Belgium is still a legit squad. Even though the US could be at their best, the problem is that Europe is just on another level. Oh, I haven't even mentioned Spain yet either. They still have young. They're still not as great, but Italy looks good too. Italy hasn't lost in over 2 years. Okay. There's just so much young talent. Also, don't forget Bruno Fernandes on Portugal. You can't count them out either. Like, I'm just listening. I'm just thinking teams are just coming to my head. But if the US doesn't at least make the knockout round of the 2026 World Cup, it's a gigantic failure. They got to make it out of the group stage. And I would say that if they win their group in 2026, then they should make the quarterfinals easily. If they don't make the quarterfinals after winning the group 2026, that is a failure. But in 2022, they have to at least be competitive, if not make it to the round of 16 in the 2020 World Cup. Make it there first, because you didn't even do that in 2018.
Now, can you just speak on the impact of defeating Mexico? Because it's one thing that if it's, a U20 squad, U18 squad, but these were the A squads again. And we've always said, well, U.S. should forget about striving to be best in the world when they can't even be the best in CONCACAF. You're the largest country by a mile in CONCACAF. You got beat by Canada. You've been beat by Honduras. Mexico has owned you for a long, long time now. But is this the stride the U.S. needed to get the momentum going into World Cup qualifiers and the Gold Cup later this year? But I think there are going to be more B squads playing that Gold Cup because of World Cup qualifying, and then needed for the next 16 months, 14 to 16 months before we get into the Qatar World Cup.
It's huge to beat Mexico because Mexico, they had the 2019 Gold Cup final over us, which that was a rough match to watch. That was a rough match. And you basically had Mexico, who has produced talents like Chucky Lozano, Carlos Vela, Guillermo Ochoa, just so much talent. And the fact that the U.S. was finally able to beat them in a big game, it shows that the U.S. doesn't have to live in Mexico's shadow, that they can be even better than Mexico. Because Mexico is our biggest rivals. We beat them in the 2002 World Cup round of 16. I know we're both too young to remember that, but they did do that. And the U.S. has a chance to be the best, not just qualify for the World Cup, but to be the best, to be better than Costa Rica, who made it to the World Cup quarterfinals in 2014 with Keylor Navas going God mode. U.S. has the chance to be the best. And the fact that they beat Mexico and won the Nations League, it showed that U.S. is on their way. And beating Mexico just gives the U.S. men's national team a sense of confidence that they haven't had since the Belgium game. This is the highest moment for the U.S. men's national team since the Belgium game, where they went toe-to-toe with the European power, and Tim Howard just had one of the best goalkeeper performances ever. So this is huge going forward. It's a huge confidence booster.
We're going to close out this first live stream talking about the absolutely insane Azerbaijan Grand Prix on Sunday. A chance for Lewis Hamilton after a very gut-wrenching tire puncture for Max Verstappen, dominating the race, was on his way to victory. And Pirelli, one of the very first times I've come across it, Pirelli just having problems with their hard tire and their tire not being able to hold, being able to keep up with those extremely high speeds on that main straight in Baku. We had a scary crash with Lance Stroll and Max Verstappen, both blue tires running over 200 miles per hour, which is not very ideal if you're in a race or if you're Pirelli. I'm pretty sure you got some angry dudes up in the headquarters this week. And to me, I feel like it kind of overshadowed our feel-good podium. I mean, it's probably one of the best podiums you've had, Sean, since watching Formula One. I mean, we got Sergio Perez, his second career win, and then we got Sebastian Vettel, who's seems to be on the positive end of getting Aston Martin competitive at least and not finishing outside the top 10. And then we had Pierre Gasly in an epic battle with Charles Leclerc in the final 2 laps, hold him off and get on the podium. But it's still the Pirelli issues. Lewis Hamilton running wide because his brakes were just on fire before the restart on the standing start. You know, he's the one saying this isn't a sprint, it's a marathon, and then he shoots it wide on the restart. Just an absolutely crazy race. Now, granted, it would have been as crazy if we didn't red flag the race, and a lot of motorsports purists and a lot of drivers were upset that F1 even restarted the race. A lot of saying, well, the Americans got in and, you know, forced us to restart, which, I mean, come on. I know it's a dig at NASCAR, but I just don't think a race should complete its total laps. I'm not saying you need an overtime to decide your race, but you should at least hit the full distance as long as you're within that 3 hour window that F1 allots. Because once you get past the 3 hours, then it's over. And the race, if the race is red flag. Now, if you have a safety car and, you know, you don't reach the full distance in 2 hours, the race is still over. I think that's fair, but it was red flagged. We only had 2 laps to complete and we were well within that 3 hour time allotment for Formula One. So I think it was fair game to get those final 2 laps in. But Sean, you were the one covering the race. You get the shot of Max Verstappen spinning out and wrecking down the main straight. What's the first thing that comes to your mind?
Where do I even begin with this race? Well, I'll start with the Verstappen. When Max Verstappen crashed into the wall and I heard David Croft yelling, "Oh, it's Max Verstappen." I literally did the surrender cover. My jaw just dropped. I couldn't even like live tweet that Verstappen crashed. I literally just sat in my chair like this, and my jaw just dropped. And for a few seconds, the whole world just paused. I couldn't believe what I just saw. Max Verstappen, I wouldn't say it was just dominating the race. He did have to like work his way up to the race, but it looked like it was his race to lose. And it looked like he was really putting his foot down in the championship battle. But then when he crashed out, I couldn't believe it. It was one of the most individually shocking moments I have probably seen in F1. I couldn't believe it. I was like, well, how did this happen? Because the same thing happened to Lance Stroll. The heck is going on here? And it just felt so gut-wrenching. And I also thought to myself, oh, great. Lewis Hamilton caught a break. You got to be kidding me. Verstappen didn't deserve this. And luckily for Verstappen, this didn't cost him anything in the championship standings, because what would I tell you that, you know, it was early in the morning. I didn't want to wake my roommate up. But when I tell you that I lost my mind when Lewis Hamilton went one,
You and Mark Webber.
Yeah.
Mark Webber screaming on the Aussie broadcast. Ah!
Yes. When I saw Lewis Hamilton went one, I was like, my jaw dropped. I was like, oh my gosh, this is the most beautiful thing ever, because I'm sorry. I don't hate Lewis Hamilton, but I did not want him to take the championship lead back because of Pirelli. Okay, I'm sorry. I really did not want to happen. And Hamilton did not crash, and the memes are just glorious. Everything about this race was just pure insanity. The podium was insanity. Leclerc and Gasly's battle. Can we give a shout out to Pierre Gasly here? That was an insane battle. Gasly is great on one-on-one battles. Remember his battle with Sergio Perez at Spa last year, the highlight of that race. Pierre Gasly is great in those one-on-one battles, and it shows that Gasly is a really, really good driver, and he's getting the most out of AlphaTauri, who, by the way, finished P3 and P7. So AlphaTauri is doing real. AlphaTauri is P5 in the constructors right now. Who would have thought that, being above Alpine and Aston Martin? So there's so much to take away from this race. And how about Yuki Tsunoda, P7 on a technical track?
Yeah, I think a lot of people, they were celebrating Sebastian Vettel getting P2. I forget to mention that Alonso finished 6th, Tsunoda finished 7th. But here's my biggest takeaway here is that with all the chaos, Lewis running wide, Verstappen DNFing, if I am Total Wolf, I'm looking at a P12 for Valtteri Bottas, who finished below both Alfa Romeos, and saying, you know what? Maybe it's time to say we should start looking for better drivers to fill the second Mercedes. Because you think that a Nico Rosberg would just give up 4 spots on his own, not fight in the closing laps, and wind up P12 of all positions, and he finished below probably the second, third worst team on the grid. Both of them, you finished both below Kimi and Giovinazzi. Now, granted, Kimi and Giovinazzi are tremendous drivers, but still, the team is years slower than the Mercedes ever will be. I'm sorry. This is the most egregious result we've gotten from Valtteri Bottas because it was natural. There's no excuses for that. You're the top racing organization in Formula One, which makes you the top racing organization in the entire world. And you came up P12 behind both AlphaTauris and both Alfa Romeos. There's just no excuse for that.
No, I absolutely agree with you. That is very egregious, to say the least. Now, Valtteri did finish outside the top 10 in Turkey, but it was a wet track. We can excuse
spun
that.
out 3 different times.
Yeah, but we can excuse that. A lot of drivers spun that day. That was a very tough race for every driver. But to finish P12 is unacceptable. How did Bottas qualify 10th? Are you serious? This is the same guy who won Baku 2 years ago. But Bottas literally won the last race. His confidence is shot, man. He looks washed out there. George Russell would have finished in the top 5 at least in that car. Are you kidding me? We got to get George Russell and Mercedes now. I'm sick and tired of watching George Russell struggle with
We got a Mercedes P6 in points right now, Sean, below Lando, below Sergio, and below Leclerc. Something's got to be done. And I said, this could be a mid-season pull. I mean, maybe they need to take a page out of Red Bull's book and start pulling drivers mid-season.
I mean, Red Bull has a pretty good second driver. Just saying. No, they need to get George Russell in the scene now, because George Russell will get the most. Let's say Valtteri Bottas is Jared Goff. Jared Goff was really good with Sean McVay in the Rams in 2018, just like Valtteri has been very good with Mercedes at times. But at the end of the day, he's a product of the system. He doesn't elevate that second Mercedes car. He's just a natural part of it. And there are times where he can really struggle. Do you want Jared Goff to be your quarterback, or do you want Matthew Stafford to be your quarterback? We saw the Rams make that decision. And now you have the chance to get, let's say, the Trevor Lawrence of F1 into that seat. Who will get more out of it, Jared Goff or Trevor Lawrence? Pretty easy decision, in my opinion.
I definitely agree. That will do it for this first edition of the Rich Report live stream. We have this recorded, so it will be up on Spotify and Apple later today. If you missed the live stream, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification button so you know when we go live at the time we do. For Sean Clark, I'm Cameron Richardson, and we will see you guys on Friday for another edition of the Rich Report. Going to be talking about the playoffs, and maybe we're going to do a eulogy for the Colorado Avs if they can't get the job done tomorrow against the Golden Knights. Have a great rest of your day, and we will see you then.